name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Our Father,
Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So good morning to you all.
Good morning, Father.
Good morning, Father.
So once again, I am very indeed happy to be with you and to present another talk on the theme of sacramental matrimony. So when we see how suitable this topic to me, I do not know, but still, sacrament of matrimony. I tried my level best to communicate to you what is the marriage as sacrament. And I hope, as you all know, that I hope you are all having my copy, written copy. So I have divided into three parts here, the sacrament of matrimony. The first part is the pre-Vatican time. That is the historical, how the concept of marriage came into the lives of the people. That is, the first part always talks before pre-Vatican Council, what happened. That is my first part. The second part is Vatican Council time. Because we know that so many reformation and so many rethinking and many changes took place in the church, that is after the Vatican Council. So even in the marriage also, there are so many reformation and so many correction had been made by the Pope and the Bishops' Council, especially in the Vatican Council. So my second part would be Vatican Council time. What are the corrections they had made? My third part is theology of marriage, because more than me, you all know what is the practice of marriage and reality of marriage. But as a priest, my duty is to educate you about the theology of marriage, because since our church has given the marriage as sacrament, one of the 7 sacraments, marriage is still in the marriage existing, because there is some theology, there is some divinity in that marriage. So I am here to educate you about the theology of marriage. That is my 3 part. Of course, the conclusion I have not concluded. I have not concluded. In my conclusion, I have given what is the status of current situation and why these are all happening. And I have not concluded with any judgment, but I have given the current status, and I am just opting to you. I am giving to you to decide what is that. And also, because why I have not given means, because the current situation, the sacrament of marriage is not taking place many times because of living together, and there are so many things not taking place. So if we study, if we begin to research about the problems in the marriage, if we begins to talk about the formalities and the rules and regulations that what our country has to get marriage, to marry someone, what are the system we need to be followed. Even our church has given there is a 6-month prior notification needed to be given for marriage. That is our you could see in the bulletin also, whether our bulletin, but that is the church office information to the people, to the couple who wants to get married. they have to inform to the church before 6-month notification. So there are so many rules and regulation norms for getting married. So I am not going to touch all those things because rules are rules for discipline, for main purposes. I am going to present to you in the beginning how the concept of marriage came, because you have people, you have man and a woman, then they sensed the love with one another, with opposite sex. Normally, as a adult gets a natural attraction towards the opposite sex, then they started to share each other the sense of love. Then they began to live together. But at those times, there was no so-called marriage. So they just lived together. So how it came into the form of marriage, that is very, very important. So let us go word by word. Then if you have any doubts regarding that, then you can ask. Then I would be able to explain to you as my best. Historical development. For the first 300 years or so of Christianity, marriage was simply a family matter, and the church had little or nothing to do with it. Like Jewish marriage, it was very much a family covenant. The Roman government never touched the right of a man and a woman to marry in whatever way they deemed fit. The law laid down no prescriptions for any secular or religious ceremony for marriages. Only mutual consent was required, which did not bind the partners for life. As late as the year 866, Pope Nicholas I said that marriage by mutual consent was accepted as valid without any ceremony at all. Indeed, this very attitude prevailed in Christianity for the 1200 years until the bishops began to demand a wedding ceremony in the 11th and 12th centuries. No bishop or priest was ever required to be present at the marriages of two Christians, nor was any religious ceremony deemed necessary. If any priest did attend a wedding and gave a blessing, this was simply a private courtesy, quite unnecessary to affect the marriage. So before there was the Christianity religion, the marriage was not there at the beginning. They can marry like the woman and a man, they can live together. But since there was no particularly so-called marriage, so live for life, that was not there at that time. They liked each other, they started to live. But later, that was in the 866 year, that only Pope Nicholas I, he brings that marriage into the Christianity. At the same time also he said that is not necessary, the priest or bishop not needed for that ceremony, even it's not necessary to take place in church, that was not at all until 12th and 13th century. So now we will see what are the challenges that marriage, the sacrament of matrimony has had, because some of the challenges that church also underwent regarding bringing the sacrament of matrimony into the church, into the list of sacraments. So some of the challenges that church underwent. So because in order to find answer for those challenges, then only the marriage became as sacrament. The first challenge is Gnosticism. Gnosticism is a Gnostics, the founders. That is a group of people, Ism, we must know, a group of people with a particular ideology. So what Gnosticism was around before Christianity and soon infiltrated it. Basically, Gnostics held that matter, the world, the body, and sexuality are evil. The Old Testament, which told the story of creation, must be rejected. Souls were pure spirit and were not meant to be encast in inferior flesh. Marriage had to be bad because it brought souls into the world and imprisoned them in flesh. The only way to live spiritually was to be celibate. This was the first pressure on church. We know what Gnosticism are saying. For them, the unification of two bodies and getting together by sex, that's are all evil, because they say soul is a divine. This is chaining or imprisoning the soul into the body's control. That is the way the Gnostics brought their ideology. And even in the Bible also, some of the challenges by the passages. So Bible gives the distinct impression that sex is really plan B. Plan A was obviously a special God-given design whereby perfect unity and harmony existed between Adam and Eve that either did not require sex. In plan A, if sex was not used, people could come into existence much the same way as the marriage of angels, whatever way that was. It was a well-known fact that Jesus was celibate, unmarried. His mother was a virgin, and his precursor, cousin, John the Baptist, he was celibate. His most famous missionary apostle was celibate, Paul. Although some of the original 12 apostles were married, they were called away from marriage. Besides, when questioned about marriage and the resurrection, Jesus said that in heaven there is neither marrying nor giving in marriage, but all are as the angels in heaven. For reference, Gospel of Mark chapter 12:35. He said too that anyone who has given up home, wife, and children for his sake will inherit everlasting life. For reference, Gospel of Matthew chapter 19:29. So the Bible also, we have to see some of the questions, especially where Adam and Eve. Bible never mentioned Adam and Eve had sex, and so that was their one point. Then Jesus did not get married, and Mother Mary we consider as virgin, and John the Baptist, apostles, some of the St. Paul and all the apostles also called from the marriage and asked by Jesus to follow him. So these are other points they are bringing, that even in the Bible it is not particular importance was not given to marriage. So some of those challenges church underwent. Procreation, they saw both sex and marriage in the context of a duty to society. Society and the church needed children. Sex was justified because it brought children into the world. The church fathers justified sex only slowly on that ground. Its primary and fundamental orientation was the begetting of children. Any other use, any other motive came to be seen as sinful. So they consider in the beginning marriage meant for just procreation, not anything else. That the procreation was very important to bring many people for society or a religion. They are needed. So children are more needed. So they get together. They had. So in that perspective only they saw procreation meant for sex, children, begetting children. That's also one of the challenges. Then the ideology of St. Augustine. Here we could see in both ways. St. Augustine, some of the questions he brought forth. At the same time, St. Augustine also supported in later through his defense, through his philosophy. St. Augustine influenced the church on marriage in a profound way. he affirmed that marriage was good. The purpose of marriage is none other than begetting of children. Still, every child is literally born of his or her parents' sin, because procreation is possible only with the seductive aid of physical lust. According to Augustine, sexual desire was evil, a result of original sin. Those who gave in to it cooperated with the evil and committed a further sin. Even those who were married usually committed at least a slight sin when they engaged in sexual intercourse, but they could be excused if they did it for the right reason. Augustine claimed that it is not sexual intercourse itself that is sinful, but concupiscence, the sexual appetite gone out of control. However, the interpretation of his teaching presented a negative view on sexual intercourse, and he gave the impression that only those who remained unmarried could successfully avoid the sin. There were other positive aspects in Augustine's teaching on marriage, particularly in his writings against the Manichaeism. That is, the Manichaeism is the Manichaeans. There is some who are all following. Augustine taught that marriage has three values. So now, the beginning he said talked about the negative points. Now he is coming to the positive point. Augustine said it has three values: fidelity, offspring, and sacrament. Fidelity is the faithfulness present in the mutual love of the spouses. It pertains to sexual love, but it also involves a commitment of love and trust. He sees the natural companionship of the sexes as a good of marriage. Procreation is the primary purpose of both sexuality and marriage. The offspring are to be accepted in love, nurtured with affection, and educated in the Christian faith. Marriage is a sacrament signifying on earth the future unity of God's people in heaven. Marriage was a visible sign of the invisible union between Christ and his spouse, the church. Marriage has the value of being a sacred sign, a sacramentum of the union between Christ and the church. Marriage began to be called a sacrament in the broad sense of the sacrament. Augustine viewed marriage as a beneficial social institution necessary for the perseverance of society and the continuation of the human race, sanctioned by God since the creation of the first man and woman. However, he was ambiguous in regard to sexuality and saw sexual desire as a dangerous human energy. Maybe we know the life of St. Augustine. We know how he lived and how he converted. Maybe according to his concept, the beginning, the negative point what Augustine was talking about sex. So in the marriage what takes place, the sexual intercourse takes place. So in that angle, maybe he was very sinful before his conversion. So according to his concept, it could be sex he considered as a lust and a sinful one, but that happened in the marriage. So that's why he, in the negative point of marriage, he says that this since sexual intercourse takes place in the marriage, so it cannot be considered as holy. There is sinful things happen, and also he is just justifying. Maybe for a little reason we can justify them, because the sex takes place for the right reason, that is for bringing children. So when it happens for the right purpose and right intention, it could be accepted. That is the way first he says. Then again he is accepting fidelity, offspring, and sacrament. These three things are taking place. He speaks good of the marriage on the topic, on the point of these 3 points. Because when a woman and a man get together, fidelity, faithfulness, offspring, a right purpose they are joining. Not only meant for bodily pleasure, but also meant for children. Then they say it's a living sacrament. It's for like a church and Christ. For the same way they are also. So in that way afterwards he is supporting. The fourth, sacrament. Throughout the early Middle Ages, most church people held virginity in higher esteem than marriage. Christians could not deny that God had told Adam and Eve to increase and multiply. And so marriage itself had to be good. Some bishops who blessed newly married couples recommended that they abstain from intercourse for 3 days out of respect for the blessing. Others told them not to come to church for a month after the wedding, or at least not to come to communion with their bodies and souls still unclean from intercourse. The theological tradition to the 11th century taught that marriage was good, even though sexual activity was usually perceived as sinful. The road to having marriage become a sacrament was travelled under 3 powerful impulses. One was a renewed interest in Augustine and his teaching on marriage, in which he developed the idea that marriage was a sacramentum. Augustine had taught that marriage was a sacramentum. It was a sign of the union between Christ and his church, and it was also a sacred pledge between husband and wife. A local council at Verona in 1184, marriage was officially designated a sacrament, and subsequently at a number of ecumenical councils, marriage was listed among the official sacraments of the church. Theologians justified marriage as a sacrament on the basis of St. Paul's teaching that it was a living sign of Jesus' covenant with his church. Living sign of Jesus' covenant with his church. It was an outward sign of his inner love. The grace of the sacrament was to assist the couple to grow in holiness and perform their married duties. So, how it came into a sacrament. So in the beginning, when the newly married couple takes place, when they marry, sometimes some bishops' teachings was, so for 3 days, after your marriage, for 3 days you should never get together. You should not have sex. So you just pray for life. And also there was then, soon after your marriage, 1 month, don't come to the church, because you are all going for mass, for sex. Since you are active in sex, don't come to the church. And also don't receive communion. So these were the things. In the early time it happened. But the point of Augustine teachings, so we see already he gave 3 points: fidelity, offspring, and sacrament. Then they developed the idea of Augustine on marriage as sacrament. Then they developed, then the council together, they officially announced that marriage as sacrament in the council in Verona in the year 1184. That time it was announced. Now, contract. In the 12th century, there was the development of a Christian wedding ritual. Up to this time, there was still no obligatory church ceremony in connection with Christian marriages. During the 11th century, this began to change. Bishops started to demand that all weddings be blessed by a priest, and that weddings be held at least near a church and eventually in it. By the 12th century, an established liturgical wedding ceremony existed. Still, it was not mandatory, and its absence did not in any way affect the validity of the marriage. Theologians in the 13th century introduced the term matrimonial contract, which has remained with us right down to the present code of canon law. Marriage became a contract. As a contract, it was a precise exchange of rights, namely the rights to each other's bodies for those acts needed for the procreation of children. The theologians said that the marriage contract was an exchange of rights to those acts appropriate to beget children. Moreover, church control over marriage was maintained by claiming that every marriage contract between baptized Christians was by that very fact a sacrament, that is forever contract. So now the 12th century, now the bishops are a little bit strict with that, and they brought the rules that marriage should be blessed by a priest. And but that time they did not given particularly it should take place in church. That was not given. Minimum, at least near the church, the marriage was encouraged to take place. And what happened later, after the 12th century and 13th century, the theologians started to develop this concept of marriage. There they brought the quotation, that name, contract. So marriage as contract. That's what they started to bring. And they added in the Code of Canon Law. I am talking everything before pre-Vatican time. So you have to see. So that time it was there in the Code of Canon Law. And the main point is they mentioned that rights. The contract is I have right over your body. You have right over my body. So that is the contract that they are bringing. So it is for the good purpose, begetting, procreation. That's what children. That's what they were bringing. Now next, how the contract becomes consent. We will see. Consent, according to Roman tradition, marriage was by consent, and after the consent was given by either the spouses or the guardians, the marriage was considered legal and binding. In the Frankish and Germanic tradition, however, the giving of consent came at the betrothal, and the marriage was not considered to be completed or consummated until the first act of intercourse had taken place. For Europeans, marriage was preceded by a whole series of steps. Gregory IX settled the issue with a final decision by declaring that mutual consent makes the marriage, but the bond is perfected and becomes absolutely indissoluble through consummation. A decision was made officially which effectively excluded control over marriage by everyone but the bride and groom. The decision became the legal practice of the Catholic Church. It was reinforced by further papal decrees in the 13th century. Still remains in effect in canon law. If Catholics who wanted to be freed from their spouses, they would have to prove that their marriage contract could be nullified, declared to be non-existent, either for deficiency in consent or some other canonically acceptable reason. So we have to see in the consent point how it came, because even today the marriage, the consent is being asked by the both bride and groom. Both are asked. After getting their consent only, the church proceeds to have to bless the marriage. So, but before the French and Germanic tradition, they had something, first they will have intercourse, then if it goes on well, and then they will plan for next marriage. So that is the way it was going, but the same, but Europeans were a little in different way. Then Pope Gregory IX, then he was against that attitude. Then he brought first the consent should be there. If they both like each other, then they could be blessed. So the consent, when it comes, then the force or compulsion in marriage, all those things are going away, vanishing. So now the later, then the 13th century, this rule was in the old canon law, and even now today, it is still exists, that getting the consent from the parties. Council of Florence in the 1439, it affirmed the sacramentality of marriage, stating, the seventh is the sacrament of matrimony, which is the sign of the union of Christ and the church. A triple good is found in matrimony. The first is the begetting of children and their education to the worship of God. The second is the faithfulness which each spouse owes to the other. Third is indissolubility of marriage, is as much as it represents the indissoluble union of Christ and the church. So 14th century, in the year 1439 only, the Council of Florence brings three important points to the marriage. That is the fruit of marriage, we can say, or what is the effect of marriage. Those three is begetting of children, educating your children into the Catholic faith, that we say Catholic faith, but Christian faith, or to worship their God on the educating their children. Then indissolubility of marriage. Once if you've done, it cannot be separated. That is 3 points the Council of Florence brought into. Then 15th century. So when you see the order, you will know how slowly. So when starting from the Pope Nicholas first in the year 866, then 12th century, 13th century, then some of the Reformation, now 14th century Florence, Council of Florence, now Council of Trent in 15th century. So slowly how it is emerging, how it is reforming. Council of Trent in the year 1563, the council reacted by affirming marriage as a sacrament whose grace raised natural love to perfect love. So Christian marriage was perceived as superior to other forms of marriage. It did not as often thought defend the absolute indissolubility of marriage. After all, the council fathers were aware of their tradition of dissolving the marriage bond and of the Eastern tradition of allowing divorce. They did not condemn that. The council defended the church claim to be competent to legislate for matrimonial matters. Trent vindicated both the sacramentality of marriage and the church right to regulate it. So though at those times, but now it is the church is very strict, and it is not immediately those who ask for divorce, the church is not permitting. It takes time, and we have our own court. So in that way. So, but in the before the 15th century, before the Council of Trent, there was a divorce. Though the marriage all takes place or regulated in the church, divorce also at the same time, if they want to get separated, it was also taking place. So there, then the Council of Trent was condemning that act. We cannot simply give permission, or we cannot encourage the divorce to take place. Then we have to bring some of the legislation or regulation for the cause of divorce. So there what Council of Trent was bringing. Now, 1917, the Code of Canon Law defined marriage in contractual terms as mutual exchange of rights over one another's body for acts that are of themselves suitable for the generation of children. The code claimed that marriage was essentially a contract, judicial matter concerned with the exchange of rights to sexual intercourse to beget children. This was marriage first and foremost purpose. Canon law did not take away account of the notion of marriage as a mutual sharing of affection, the sharing of community. It reduced marriage to the most specific of legal descriptions. It was a contract, pure and simple, of sexual rights, whose sole purpose was to have children. Marriage had officially arrived at being a judicial entity. Conjugal society was reduced to mutually exchanging sexual acts for the sake of procreation, even though very few people thought of their marriage primarily as the exchange of rights over one another's body. So we know we studied before we saw marriage as contract, that point they brought, the theologians brought, that was accepted, and the 1917 canon law also was mentioning that is the marriage is a contract, that is the rights over one's own body for the purpose of children. That's what they were bringing. And at the same time also the Code of Canon Law was bringing they have to bring the conjugal love society and everything for the sake of procreation, children. So at that time the church was particular with bringing many children. Caste concubi, that is another encyclical letter by Pope Pius XI in the 1930, gives a complete exposition of the Catholic teaching on marriage. Though the stress is somewhat on the institutional aspect, the encyclical also brings out many personal elements. While it calls the procreation and the education of offspring the primary end of marriage, it also refers to mutual union as the primary cause and reason of marriage perceived as a partnership. So until then, and with that, I finished my first part, pre-Vatican Council time, what happened. So now the Vatican Council, that is the main thing for all our church, because of the Vatican Council, very, very important, where they made all those changes. So we will see. So in the first part, I hope we have still a lot to go. Still we have a very limited time, so I am going fast. So the biggest clashes and disagreements among more than 2,500 bishops at Vatican II were over matrimony. A fairly large number of the bishops took a stand against the legalistic understanding of marriage in the old code, old canon law, 1917. So now the first, because in the old canon law, they always used marriage as contract. Now the Second Vatican Council brings some changes, covenant. Marriage is covenant. Our primary vision for marriage is that of a covenant, an intimate partnership of married life and love. The Council did not use the traditional term contract to describe the marriage bond. Instead, it adopts a remarkably personalistic standpoint and speaks of the marriage covenant, which is sealed by an irrevocable personal consent. The Council caused in the 1983 revision of the code to see marriage more as a covenant between the spouses, reflecting the covenant between God and humanity. So now the Vatican brings the word contract was removed and now covenant. Then second, in the Vatican II, they bring interpersonal communion. So especially in the Vatican Council, Gautam, that is a Latin word, Gautam Spasm, insists on the personal nature of married love, which pervades the whole of marital life and is uniquely expressed through the conjugal act. Marriage is the primary form of interpersonal communion and is of the highest importance for the well-being of the individual and of human and Christian society. Husband and wife are equal in personal dignity. By cultivating constancy of love, they give witness to faithfulness and thus help to bring about a renewal of marriage and a family life. Marriage is primarily seen as a sharing of life by two human beings who love each other. And sexuality and procreation. Vatican Council turned away from the language of primary and secondary ends of marriage. Sexual intimacy is perceived in the context of the total marital relationship, and the procreation of children is seen as grounded in marital love and in the orientation of marriage itself. The begetting of children is not so much an explicit purpose of marriage as it is a natural development of two people who love each other. We know now why they brought this, because in the early they were talking about first point, second point, sex is sin, but for the right cause is not sin. This is what they were talking in the pre-Vatican time. If you do sex for the sake of children, for procreation, it is not sin. But if you do for the sharing of togetherness, husband and wife, that is sin in that way. But here they totally change the idea. Now, sacrament. Now they bring. Marriage is such a noble and sacred calling. Christian spouses have a special sacrament by which they are fortified and receive a kind of consecration in the duties, dignity of their state. Through this sacrament, they are penetrated with the Spirit of Christ, which suffuses their whole life with faith, hope, and charity. Authentic married love is taken up into divine love, and it is ruled and enriched by the redemptive power of Christ and the salvific action of the Church. Marriage is a path to holiness. As husband and wife are called to be faithful, generous, and gracious to each other in fulfillment of their marriage covenant, so it is the whole Church called to be faithful to its covenant with God in Christ. So faith commitment. The Council emphasizes the necessity of faith commitment for the sacrament of marriage. Marriage is not just a ceremony by which two people are legally bound together. As a sacrament, it is an act of worship and expression of faith, a sign of the church union with Christ. Christian couples should be signs to each other, their children, and the world of the mystery of Christ and the church by the testimony of their love for each other and their concern for those in need. Marriage is not just a union between baptized Christians, it is union between faithful Christians. Human Vitae, it is Pope John Paul II, popular encyclical. So in 1968, Pope John Paul writes, and which condemned artificial birth control, never uses the word contract in relation to marriage. Given the controversy over the concept, this could hardly be an oversight. Instead, he uses the word covenant and sees the mutual gifting of the person of the spouses for the sake of forming a communion of their beings as the object of marital consent, with procreation being the culmination of this communion. The encyclical situates the problem of planned parenthood in the framework of a total vision for humanity. The love of the spouses has its origin in God, who is love. It must be fully human, faithful and exclusive, fruitful and suscitating new human lives. Responsible parenthood is deeply related to the moral order established by God. It requires that the finality of the conjugal act be ordained to the union of the spouses and be open to procreation. The Pope shows the intimate union of these two aspects. The reason why Pope wrote this, because of that was the time many questions arised regarding the problem of the marriage, regarding contraception and birth control, abortion. So in that time, so the Pope was writing regarding this. And also he condemned the word using contract. So why always they are using it? The modern world was going on changing as they change. So the living together, the relationship between a man and woman, it all becomes like a business profession, contract. So that's what church was always standing, and the word against that word, contract. Then another encyclical, Familiaris Consortio. As a follower, it is 1981. As a follower of the Synod of Bishops on the family, Pope John Paul issued an elaborate exhortation regarding the role of the Christian family. He does not follow the Tritine preference for celibacy, virginity over marriage. When human sexuality is not regarded as a great value given by the Creator, the renunciation of it for the sake of the kingdom of heaven loses its meaning. The Pope strongly defends the sanctity and the indissolubility of Christian marriage. He reforms the teaching of the Church regarding responsible transmission of human life and asks that its practice be helped by proper sex education and research into human fertility. The family, as the first vital cell of society, must be the prime concern of the whole of the society. It has a share in the life and mission of the Church. It is a community in dialogue with God through worship and prayer. The Pope emphasizes the need for personal care of the family. So until the second part is over. So now the theology of marriage. So far what I talked, it is the history. How from the beginning till the Vatican Council, how they changed the topic, the ideology, the terms and the rules in the legislation, the code of canon law, how they changed. So now that history is over. Now the real theology of marriage, which means what church really speaks about marriage. That's we need to know. In church perspective, first point, church always uses the word covenant. We never encourage the word contract. Church always says marriage as covenant. Vatican Council never used the legal word contract of marriage, but preferred the much more biblical and personal word covenant. Marriage is rooted in the conjugal covenant of irrevocable personal consent. The distinction between contract and covenant shows how Catholic theology of marriage has changed in modern times. Contract, the difference between contract and covenant. Contract deals with things, covenant with people. Contract engage the services of people, covenant engage persons. Contract is made for a stipulated period of time. Covenant is forever. Contract can be broken with material loss to the contracting parties. Covenant cannot be broken, but if violated, they result in personal loss and broken heart. Contract is a secular affair, belongs to the marketplace. Covenant is sacred affair, belongs to the home, temple, or the church. Contract is best understood by lawyers, civil and ecclesiastical. Covenant is appreciated better by poets and theologians. Contract is witnessed by people with the state as guarantor. Covenant is witnessed by God with God as guarantor. Contract can be made by children who know the value of a cent. Covenant can be made only by adults who are mentally, emotionally, and spiritually mature. Contract is a legal reality that confers certain rights, imposes certain responsibility. Both parties to the contract must be a legal age or bound to fulfill the terms of the contract. Contract can be made between friends, but in itself contract is a very impersonal agreement. A covenant is a bond of love between the parties and intensely personal. Like a contract, it also involves a certain rights and responsibility, but covenant goes beyond a contract since it includes a personal commitment of both parties to the welfare of the other. Contract is clearly limited in its scope. Covenant establishes relationship that cannot be so easily defined. The covenant relationship is open-ended. So the prophetic symbol of marriage. Marriage is the mystery that makes visible in the world the faithful attitude of Christ, who nourishes and cares for members of the physical body. It represents the intermediate accomplishment of this prophetic act of fidelity. Christian marriage is a two-tier reality. The first human tier proclaims and makes real and celebrates the intimate community between man and woman. The key passage again is the one in Ephesians. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, gave himself for it, to consecrate it. This mystery has many implications, but I am saying that it applies to the Christ and the church. For reference, letter of St. Paul to the Ephesians, chapter 5, verses from 21 to 32. Christian spouses exemplify the special union between Christ and the church. A couple entering into a secular marriage say to one another, I love you and give myself to you. A Christian couple entering into the covenant of Christian marriage are saying that they are also saying much more, I love you as myself, as God loves his people, as Christ loves his church. Christian marriage does proclaim the love of this man and woman. It is a sacrament, a sign, a cause of inward grace. Therefore, the mutual love of husband and wife in a Christian marriage is not just any love, but love that is modeled on and reflects on, is sustained by the love of God. Commitment and fidelity. A covenant involves a radical and solemn commitment. A marriage covenant is a deeply serious commitment. Together, the husband and wife commit themselves mutually to create and sustain a climate of personal openness, acceptance, trust, and honesty that will nurture intimate community and abiding love. In entering a marriage covenant, they mutually commit themselves to explore together the religious depth of their human existence and to respond to that depth in the light of their personal faith in Christ. The number of unmarried couples living together has greatly increased in recent decades. In the US, there were how many? 439,000 cohabiting couples in the year 1960. In 2025, there were 485 million cohabiting couples, up more than 1,000% from in the year 1960. A 2000 study found that more than half of newlyweds have lived together, at least briefly, before walking down the aisle. In the 19th century, the Soren Kierkegaard, he is an existential philosopher, Kierkegaard, complained about the lack of lifelong commitments in friendship, marriage, and ministry. Even in his time, such long-term commitments were not easy. Beyond question, absolute fidelity is similar to celibacy for the kingdom and is just as demanding. The apostles understood this well. In Matthew, when Jesus stated that it is not permissible for the husband to repudiate his wife, they retorted, if such is the case, it is not expedient to marry. The obligations in marriage are indeed quite frightening. It is not surprising that people shrink from them. How can one commit oneself to another for better or for worse? Not just for so long as it is convenient, but a commitment that will be terminated only by the death of the one of the partners. Can we really expect young couples to enter into that such a profound marital commitment that calls for mental, emotional, and spiritual maturity? The Christian faith is a good example of this kind of core commitment and is a stable marriage. Both of these will have times of stress. Both call for constant renewing and depending. Both demand learning, growth, perseverance. The partners are living together as long as they are happy with each other, not for life. An atmosphere of insecurity prevails. They can never be fully themselves in the relationship, and they are slow to invest completely in the relationship. The church discourages cohabitation completely. Church teaches that sex outside of marriage is sinful. Church has never accepted it as a preparation for marriage, because the partners are doing what they will promise not to do when they get married. They are living a contradiction in relationship and inconsistency in faith. Pope John Paul II states, the aim of pastoral action will be to make these people understand the need for consistency between their choice of life and the faith they profess. Christians believe that God is a Trinitarian relational being in the sense there is a dynamic communion between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Since we are made in the image and likeness of God, partners in marriage have the ability to be like God in being a community and living faithfully towards each other. In marriage, more than elsewhere, faithfulness and forgiveness are intimately linked. When one partner forgives the other, he or she has love enough not to imprison the other in the past and to go on building a future with the other. Since couples have the ability to forgive each other, then they can make fidelity a reality in their relationship. Faith and sacrament, that's the last point. The Catholic Church holds that every marriage between baptized person is a sacrament. There is a sacrament of marriage in the Catholic Church, But not every marriage among Catholics is necessarily a sacrament. For centuries, such courts have been delivering judgments on the validity or non-validity of marriage. None of those judgments is based on a defective faith, but on a defective consent or defective covenant love. The Catholic tradition holds that the gift of faith is bestowed in baptism. Baptism gives the know-how to faith and to being a believer, but does not make believers. Before that gift may be attributed to anyone, it must be activated freely, consciously, and deliberately into an actual act of faith. It is the personal act of faith that transforms both the human beings into a Christian believer and human beings into a sacramental marriage. As the marriage grows in love and faith, the couple can come back for the official church witness and celebration of the sacrament. So, conclusion. The Council of Trent states emphatically, if anyone says that marriage is not one of the 7 sacraments, let him be anathema. In 1852, Pius IX proclaimed that there can be no marriage between the faithful without it being at the same time a sacrament. In his encyclical of 1880, the Arcanum Divines Spanish, Pope Leo XIII taught that in Christian marriage contract cannot be dissociated from sacrament. In 1983, Code states that a valid marriage contract cannot exist between baptized person without it being by that very fact a sacrament. Pope John Paul II alludes to his teaching in Familiaris Consortio when he writes marriage between 2 baptized persons is a real symbol of the union of Christ and the church. It is not a temporary or a trial union, but one which is eternally faithful. Sacramental marriage also shows that the couple is open to receive help from God in their relationship, an opening that gives the pastor and the ecclesial community an opportunity to support and care for the marriage. Husband and wife are not alone in living their covenant relationship. They receive help from Christ and the church. Catholic sacramental marriage has the potential of facilitating a greater commitment in the couple to grow in their love for each other and a strengthening of their bond of union, because Catholic spouses can receive assistance from Christ and the church. In a globalized world, culture of temporary commitments, lifelong marriage presents a model of faithfulness and love that is opposite to the egoistic tendency of finding intimacy with no responsibility to others. Pope Benedict XVI says, today there is special need for the witness of married couples. There is a need for families that do not let themselves be swept away by modern culture currents. Sacramental marriage, which is graced by Christ and supported by the Christian community, facilitates this prophetic example expected by the spouses. The church is founded on Christian families. The most basic unit of the church is the Christian family. The Christian family is called a domestic church by the Second Vatican Council. Where there are no Christian families, the church community struggles to exist. The pastor has a responsibility to promote sacramental marriage among Christians and to support the Christian families under his care, because they are the basis of the church he leads. An important way of encouraging couples to marry sacramentally is to ensure that marriage rite is significant and meaningful for people. This involves work at inculcating culturating the rite in the local tradition, and the invitation to create new canonical rites of marriage for people of diverse culture, so as to persevere their own, to preserve their own authentic marriage customs. Pastors, therefore, are encouraged to reflect on the way of adapting the marriage rite so that it is attractive, evocative, and sacred for couples. So one point with one sentence, I conclude my talk. Only thing, where there is no Catholic couples, there cannot be church growth. The second point I like to say here is every Christian family is the domestic church. So it is the duty and responsibility of a pastor to encourage the Catholic couples as a role model to the younger generation. So that's why we celebrate Holy Family, and we celebrate 25th, 50th wedding anniversary, and we recognize them, and we always give them really, we recognize them and honor them in front of the community, so that the younger generation will have to believe that in their marriage as a sacrament, their Christian marriage, the church will be with them, the Christ will be with them to guide them and to make them to remain in their covenant. So this is with that. This are each duty and responsibility of everyone. As a pastor also, we have responsibility to encourage the couples, and as a Christian couples, you too also have the role to responsibility to establish the domestic church, because you are the main people. So where there is no Christian couples, there cannot be the growth of the church. So we should always encourage to have, if people are living together without Catholic marriage, we should work together, bring them and get Christian marriage. With that, the church also will grow. We both, Catholic family, church, both are not different. Both are same. Because a priest comes from the Catholic family. So church grows by the help of Catholic family. Church is nothing but a group of Catholic family. So it's all are together. It's all are one. So we have to support each other. Amen.
Amen.
Anything if you like to ask?
What will explain?